Welcome to the Glazov gang. Tonight we have a very special episode with a very special guest. Our guest tonight, joining the Glazov gang as a gang member, Colin Flaherty, an award-winning writer and the author of White Girl Bleed a Lot, The Return of Racial Violence and How the Media Ignore It. Colin, welcome to the Glazov gang.
Happy to be here.
It is an honor and a privilege to have you as a member of our gang, Colin.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, fantastic. Tonight we want to talk about this phenomenon that you write about and that our entire society and culture, it appears, is completely ignoring it, as well as the media. Colin, let's begin in general. What inspired you to write White Girl Bleed a Lot, and what is it about?
White Girl Bleed a Lot is about an epidemic of black mob violence all over the country. I documented hundreds of examples of it. That's half of it. The other half is how the media ignores it. I was inspired to write this book after my brother and I were doing a talk radio show in Wilmington, Delaware, and I started seeing all these accounts from Philadelphia of teenagers. They kept calling them teenagers in the streets of South Philadelphia. So it sounded strange. So I looked at the YouTube video of the accounts, and it wasn't just a few teenagers blowing off steam. It was 1,000 black people on the streets of Philadelphia, pulling people out of cars, destroying things, beating people up, going into restaurants, destroying property. And that kept happening over and over. And I kept showing these videos to people, and I kept saying, what is this? Why is there so much racial violence here? And people kept saying, Colin, race has nothing to do with that. So I knew there was something I had to write about it.
Okay, Colin, tell us about some of the recent developments. What have some recent things that have happened in this context?
Okay, I'll give you two and multiply these by 500, and this is what's happening all over the country. Kansas City, 3 or 4 nights ago, Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas City has a perennial problem in the upscale Country Club Plaza shopping district of Kansas City. Kansas City, Saturday night, they had over 200 black people in the plaza fighting, creating mayhem. It got so bad, they had to call a SWAT team. They had to call police on horses, and they sprayed the people with pepper spray. This has been happening dozens of times every summer for the last 3 years.
Now, Colin, what is the racial makeup of the individuals involved in these in this gang violence and in this mob violence?
100% black.
100% black.
This is a black thing. The exact same thing happened in a town called Ironquoit, New York, a little bit outside of Rochester. Same crowd, different location. A movie theater, huge fights in the movie theater, huge fights outside of the movie theater. Cops come in, batoning, wrestling with the people. Nobody arrested either case. And both times the newspapers reported it was just teenagers blowing off little steam.
It sounds like when there's jihadi violence and our media somehow miss the fact that the perpetrators were Muslim. But that's another topic.
No, you know what? It's exactly the same.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Right.
I'm being
You're
a little
100%.
bit... Yeah, exactly. I just mean I think it's a perfect analogy of the hypocrisy of our media, but let's talk about that particular context at another time. Now, who are the victims? What is the color makeup, the racial makeup of the victims of the black violence?
Well, there's a lot of... I focus on the predators of the violence, but when I do get around the victims, there's a lot of different kinds of victims. There's white victims, Asian, there's gay victims, there's women. A lot of old people are victims. A lot of young people are victims.
So it's not necessarily black on black. This is black on non-black.
Yeah, a lot of that.
Okay, Colin. If it was white gangs, white mob violence, filled with white people attacking black people or Spanish people, do you think that there might be some more media attention if that happened?
Well, that doesn't have to be a hypothetical question because we already know what happens if there is a case of white on black violence of any kind. It gets an enormous amount of attention.
Mm-hmm. So, Colin, tell us, what's going on here? Why are the Al Sharptons and the Jesse Jacksons and the Obamas silent? Why is our media silent? I mean, this is shameless. It's shameful This is an epidemic. I read your book. It's a brilliant book. Thank you for writing it. But the media won't touch it, and our civil rights leaders won't touch it. What's happening here with this media blackout?
You know, I wish I knew why, but I don't. And I wrote the book for one reason. I wrote the book for the people who deny it's happening. And so I don't do the causes. I didn't do the solutions. I don't do generalities or stereotypes. I also don't do apologies. I just wrote a book with a staccato of cases. All these cities around the country, big and small, the Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, Detroit, Chicago, New York. Yes, of course they're there. But how about Peoria, Illinois? How about Springfield, Missouri? How about the University of Illinois? How about Indianapolis, Seattle, Portland, Milwaukee? There's an enormous amount of racial violence in every one of these cities. So my goal in writing the book is to say, this is happening. And the editors around the country are saying it's not happening. What they're saying is, unless someone carries a sign or issues a press release or says something like burn baby burn or down with hunkies, then there is no evidence that there's racial violence. My thing is because we have so many examples and it exists so far out of proportion and our society is so highly racialized, of course it's racial violence.
Absolutely, Colin. Now, let me ask you this. In terms of how they want to see the evidence, thank you so much for contributing your work to Front Page Mag as well. It's always an honor to carry your work. One of your recent...
Honored to be in there once a week from now on.
Thank you, Colin. One of your recent articles for us dealt with one incident where a certain individual who attacked a white person was nice enough to explain why he had attacked that white person. I'm just having a mental lapses remembering his name. Remember you wrote that recent article where he explained why, and I think that white victim has died. But tell us what happened.
There's so many examples and there's so many answers, but the thing I'm thinking of is there was a person on the ground in Philadelphia, a white business guy, getting beaten up by a mob of people. And at one point he goes, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this?" And the person laughingly said, "It's not our fault. You can't fight." I don't know if that's the incident you're referring to or not.
But then there was another where he said that it's because it was a white person. There was another. I know there's many cases like that.
Oh, there's a lot of people. There are a lot of cases. Here's the point. There's a lot of cases where people are very explicitly racial. They said, "I'm beating you up because you're white," or beating you up because of some injustice that happened. But most of the racial violence does not come that neatly wrapped. It doesn't come where people are talking about things. It doesn't come videotaped. It comes enormous amounts of black people beating on somebody, stealing something, and there's something racial going on. And that's really what the book's about. It's like, what is going on here?
Right, but when it's black perpetrators, the media is not interested. Colin, tell us why the title of the book, tell our viewers why the title of the book, White Girl Bleed a Lot.
Okay, the title comes from a case of black mob violence in Milwaukee on the 4th of July. 50 to 100 black people looted a convenience store on video. They took a bunch of groceries and candy, took them a few blocks away, met 10 white kids, assaulted them very badly. At one point, a white girl was on the ground. A black woman was standing over her. She motioned to all of her friends, pointed down to the ground, and she said to all of her friends, "White girl bleed a lot." Everybody thought that was very funny. The police did not even take a report of that crime that night, like a lot of these cases that I mentioned.
Colin, I'm so grateful to you. It is always, it means a lot to me when I see a truth teller in our society, when I see somebody brave and courageous enough to say that an elephant is in a room when the forces that are in power want to deny that the elephant is in the room. It is against the left's interest to have this issue discussed. Tell us a little bit about what you have dealt with personally by dealing with this issue. Just tell us one or two maybe stories of dealing with an editor or with a newspaper, of them kind of telling you, "Hey, leave this alone, we don't want to touch this."
Well, the reporters get kind of nasty. I have a chapter in the book. Reporters, big-time reporters from Chicago, big anchors, calling me lots of names for saying this exists or reporting on it. But you know what? Mostly the reaction I get from people is relief. They're happy that somebody just wrote this book happy that somebody can talk about racial violence in a non-racist way without apologies. And that's why the book is so popular. It's like, I just put it out there and I let people make their own decisions about what is going on. I'm not trying to condemn anybody or stereotype anybody, but there's something systematic going on in this country, Jamie, and that's really what the book is begging the question. Like, what are people learning in schools? What are people learning in churches? What are people learning at movie theaters?
Absolutely. And Colin, one thing, the political dimension here, something that I've always been interested in is the lies of the left, the way that the left postures as if it's humanitarian, where in fact it's everything but that. Now here's what's happening in part that, I remember Joy Behar on one of, about a year or two, she very proudly said that the people that don't have economic power can't be racist. Right? And that's a Marxist view. That particular individual, Joe Behar, has been indoctrinated by Marxism because there's this belief that if you don't have, the reins of economic power, you can't be racist. But we know very well from everything that you've documented that every human being can inflict violence and hurt people because of racial hatred. But Colin, speak a little bit about the left in general, that there is this belief system that the previous victims, the past victims, they don't want to admit that they can now be actually the perpetrators.
I know, it sounds kind of crazy, but it's not just Joy Behar. It's the Attorney General of the United States. Just a few weeks ago, he gave a speech where he said that because of a racist criminal justice system, that black people and white people who commit the same crime get different sentences. Absolutely 100% true, and the opposite is the case. I'll give you an example. In Baltimore, David Simon, the creator of The Wire, he was just in the news a few weeks ago when he said that if he were a black person, after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, he would have taken a brick down to the courthouse. The same David Simon just wrote a book. He was a court reporter in Baltimore, and he talks about how Baltimore prosecutors are hesitant to bring cases against black people in Baltimore because Baltimore juries will not convict black defendants. So the Attorney General says the racism is directed against black people, but the studies say that black people sometimes will not be convicted by black juries. That is crazy.
Yeah, and you know what's just shameless is because don't lie. It's even incredible when there's black victims of black crime. That in some ways the humanitarian left poses as if it cares about black people, but if blacks are killed by other blacks, they're worthless in the eyes of the left. And that's another, I think, real crime that the left perpetrates, because it dehumanizes minorities if they are the victims of black crime.
Jamie, the psychiatrists tell us we are only as sick as our secrets. Mm-hmm. And we're very secretive about race and racial violence. And that's why we're so sick about it. And to talk about, racial violence, a lot of people like to pretend that we're living in a race-neutral society. Well, every day you and I pick up a newspaper and we read about the Black Caucus, black colleges, black churches, black labor unions, black engineering groups. But many stories written by members of the National Association of Black Journalists. But we have 1,000 people rampage down the streets of Philadelphia on dozens of occasions, and these same journalists turn around and say, we're colorblind. So it's very crazy out there.
Colin, we only have a couple minutes left. What did you hope that this book would help achieve, and what has been some of the fallout? Are you happy with how it's been received and maybe what it has achieved in opening the eyes of many?
Oh yeah, I'm very thrilled with the results of the book so far. New edition coming out next month. Thomas Sowell wrote a big review about it. A lot of people are talking about it on talk radio and in the newspapers and in the blogs. So I'm very thrilled about that. The only thing I hope to achieve was I didn't want to change anything or start a crusade. When people are done reading this book, they simply cannot say this problem does not exist, and mostly because of the videos I cite in the book, and the videos that in the new edition, you'll be able to use your little phone to scan a QR code, look at your phone, and you'll be seeing a video of the violence that I'm talking about in the book. So many videos of racial violence out there, Jamie.
Colin, you know, you said in one of our interviews for Front Page, and you were being very honest when I was asking you. Now, I know that, you know, as you said, your purpose here is just to call a fact and to report it, but to look a little bit at the causes. Why? What's causing a lot of this black violence? And it's easy for the left to start saying, oh, and it's poverty and this kind of thing, whereas in fact, a lot of times it could just be hatred. And you said yourself, what would you point to some things? In one of our interviews, you said that there's just a truth that in many parts of the black community, there is an intense dislike of non-blacks.
You know, and that's, I wrote a column for Front Page about critical race theory, about how this is being taught in churches, in schools, and in homes, that racism is everywhere, racism is permanent, and everybody is that all white people are racist and all black people are permanent victims. The racism is relentless. This teaching is so widespread. Again, this is the kind of thing that Holder and the president himself, they speak the lingo of critical race theory, and it's no wonder there's so much violence, because there's no doubt in my mind that this teaching creates anger and resentment.
Mm-hmm. Colin, before we go, why did it take you to write this book? What is there personally in you that was attracted to writing on this topic and felt an obligation to write on it?
Well, I thought I was out of the reporting racket, and I was a reporter. I won a lot of awards. I did a story that got a black guy out of prison. That was on NPR, LA Times. The liberals love that story. But then I started seeing this other story, and it was happening all the time. Nobody was writing. I would have been quite happy not to write it if somebody else would. So I don't know why everybody's so afraid of writing about race and racial violence, but it doesn't bother me in the least.
Well,
I'm just a guy standing on the corner watching a car crash. Yeah. That's all I'm doing, and telling you what's going on.
And they want to write it only when it's white Hispanic that's perpetrated the violence. Right? What a shame.
It's weird. You know, if you came here from another planet, you listen to Al Sharpton, he would tell you that it was open season on white people. Yeah. When the numbers, I don't use statistics in my book because the numbers are so ridiculously out of proportion. What is the point? Yeah. Black crime is worse than white crime by a factor of 10, 20, 30, or 40. Pick a number.
Colin Flaherty, an honor and a privilege to have you on the Glazov Gang. Thank you for writing White Girl Bleed a Lot. Our viewers, buy this book. You got to get it. And Colin, we'll see you very soon. Keep up the great work and keep up the fight.
An honor to be here, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. See you soon. And we'll be back very soon for another episode of the Glazov Gang. Join us then.